So I think Justin Jefferson continues to have a strong rookie campaign. And I think, he might reach 1,000 receiving yards on the season.
Right here. Sunday night matchup here. We've got the Seattle Seahawks hosting the Minnesota Vikings in what Vegas thinks will be the highest scoring game on the docket, 57.5 point over-under, with Seattle favored by just a touchdown. I think, Vegas knows Seattle's defense is not quite what it should be for a Super Bowl contender, and that just means great things for that offense. But we'll get to them in a second. I want to start on the Minnesota side, Sami, and really the biggest storyline coming out of Minnesota is Justin Jefferson, who has just been on fire the last 2 weeks. So is Justin Jefferson here to stay, Sami? How do you see this passing game? Is Justin Jefferson just the key that we needed to unlock the passing attack in Minnesota, or do you consider them close to Cleveland where they're going to run a lot too?
Yeah, I think this offense is going to resemble a lot of what Cleveland is doing as well, right? Because if you think about it, last year it was Kevin Stefanski here, and same style of offense, right? Run heavy attack, zone scheme, pass the ball, run, pass.
Play action.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I do think the pie is a lot smaller here, but that being said, that doesn't mean that, you can't find value in these receivers. I think Thielen's about to go nuclear over the next couple of weeks. I think if you can buy low on him, I think right now is the perfect time to do it. This is probably the last week that you have before this game. But Justin Jefferson, I love this kid. He's breaking out, and I think it's real. He ranks number 1 amongst all wide receivers in yards per route run, 3.7. This week he's actually going to be primarily seeing Trey Flowers, who's been absolutely horrible. He's let up 83% of his catches, completions on his catches, 1.51 yards per route run. And over the last 2 weeks, Travis, he's actually allowed 14 receptions on 17 targets for 185 yards. One touchdown that went to Gallup, and 130.6 passer rating. So I think Justin Jefferson continues to have a strong rookie campaign. And I think, he might reach 1,000 receiving yards on the season.
So I think that not only is Jefferson and Adam Thielen and obviously Dalvin Cook smash starts in this spot, like as you just laid out, given the passing attack. But if all of that is good for all these weapons, what does that mean for Kirk Cousins?
Yeah, Kirk Cousins, he gets a knock, right? I think me and you have this conversation constantly.
Yeah, almost every week.
Of course. You see the Green Bay jersey behind you. Of course, we're going to have this conversation. Listen, Kirk Cousins, he's a competent passer for fantasy as well. He's been a top 12 quarterback, QB 13 last year, but year in and year out, he's shown that he can provide value in the passing game, and he's pretty accurate. I'm just concerned about this week, honestly. No stats, all the stats aside, everything aside, it's primetime Kirk Cousins. So I'm more worried about that than anything else. Weird things happen in primetime, especially with Kirk Cousins under center.
So Teddy Bridgewater or Kirk Cousins this week as a streamer?
Ooh, that's tough. So I think the pace of play in this matchup, so it's a 57.5 point over-under in Minnesota and Seattle. I think Minnesota is going to maybe favor that to the under because they're such a slow offense. They're going to be less drives. It's going to be less plays, less opportunities to put up points. I think, the Carolina game could be a little bit faster paced. I think they're going up against Atlanta. So that's going to be, just a shootout left and right over there, left, right, and center. I would personally, listen, Teddy's a really great streamer this week. I like him a lot this week. I think they're about even, but I'd probably play Teddy over Kirk this week.
All right, on the Seattle side of the ball, we've got, Russ cooking, as everyone knows. We've got Chris Carson playing through concussions and twisted knees and doing what he does. But I would like to talk about, what you see going forward in that running back core with Chris Carson. Is this you got to just cross your fingers and hope he makes it through the season healthy? Or, I saw, Sigmund Bloom even talking about DJ Dallas as a stash. I see you put Rashad Penny on the show notes. What are you seeing out of the running game for maybe future down the line? And then in this game, you're obviously starting Chris Carson. Yeah, and to your point, I think everyone that rosters Chris Carson for the last 3 years, I think they've been just holding their breath and hoping that he makes that alive, right? Like the way he runs is so violent. And I know you know this about me where I always say that, hey, listen, he's a violent runner. It's a higher chance of him getting hurt. And we do see it. He does get banged up, but he plays through it. As far as the depth goes, I'm really glad you brought up DJ Dallas because last week we saw Carlos Hyde get no touches in favor of DJ Dallas. And DJ Dallas, I think he had 2 rushing attempts. He also had a target on the third down. So I think they're trying to work in the rookie.
it's really interesting what's going to happen when Rashad Penny gets back. I think he's eligible. Like Pete Carroll had a really good quote recently. He said, he's been working really hard. He was actually hanging out with him in the weight room, and he was just talking to him. And, he's saying that his recovery has gone really, really well, especially on his knee reconstruction surgery. I think his right thigh is like 1.5 centimeters smaller than his left thigh, which is a really good sign. Coming back from that reconstruction surgery. I mean, it's supposed to be.
Somebody's got the thigh measurements going out here. I love it. The deep dive.
That just speaks to the recovery. And, a lot of these sports physicians that I follow and I listen to, they're also saying that, he can come back and be effective this season. So Rashad Penny to me is kind of a stash because he was on a really good tear before he went down last year. And I think they really trust him. He grew into his offense. And I think Rush trusts him as well as the passing down back as well. But I think Carlos Hyde should definitely be a cut candidate if Rashaad Penny is activated. So if you have Carlos Hyde, I wouldn't get your hopes up for him.
So I like the breakdown there of the backs over in Seattle because it is kind of interesting behind Chris Carson. Yeah. In the wide receiving core, obviously Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf just exploding here all over the place when they get the chance. And that should be in most games because, look, this defense, we've talked about it, not very good, letting up a lot of points. But I want to talk a little bit about David Moore because he could be on people's radar from the waiver. And we actually saw him get quite a bit of work last week against Miami. So what is your feeling on David Moore here?
We've had this with David Moore for the last 2 years. Every year he has 3 or 4 weeks where he just goes absolutely nuclear. He goes off.
Yeah.
And then he's just quiet. And people wonder why that is. And I'll tell you why that is because, he had a 12% target market share last week, but he only ran a route on 35% of snaps. And that's going to continue to be the case, right? They're only going to roll out Tyler Lockett, Greg Olsen, and DK Metcalf. Like those are 3 pass catching options. That's it. David Moore, you're kind of just banking on a touchdown. Outside of that, there's no volume. So he's at best a desperation flex play who could come through with a touchdown, who's getting catches from the MVP right now, MVP front runner. So that's not a bad situation to be in, but I don't trust him as a weekly starter. He's really just a volatile flex DFS play at best.
What do you think if something happens to DK or Tyler Lockett? Would David Moore get a bump here? Would you like him? So sometimes we roster running backs, right, because we think they're an injury away from some significant use. Yep. Would you say that about David Moore here?
Yeah, if DK Metcalf were to get hurt, absolutely. He's definitely a field stretcher. He provides a similar skill set to what DK Metcalf does. Of course, I'm not going to say the same because DK is DK.
Right, of course.
But I think, if Tyler Lockett, knock on wood, if he gets hurt, I think John Ursua could be a really good option that could come in the slot. Has a similar skill set to Tyler Lockett as well. We haven't really talked about him much, but he's a second-year wide receiver who came in, and he's flashed a little bit, in the little playing time that he's had. He's made some good catches, and I like John Ursua as a depth piece in this offense. But for now, let's just hope none of these guys get hurt. I want to see his pass-catching attack.
Yeah, I don't want to fantasy reaper him there, but yeah, I had to ask just in case we're stashing David Moore here. Greg Olsen, streamable this week. How are you liking that matchup coming in here against Minnesota?
Yeah, listen, I think Greg Olsen, he's a third target for Russ, and he had 21% target market share last week. He led the team. It was just weird what happened in Miami last week, right? Like, weird things happened in Miami. Russ seemed a little bit off.
Going cross country,
yeah. It's a West Coast team going east, for an early game, so expected things to be a little bit weird, but Greg Olsen, he's shown that he can fall into the end zone a couple of times, and I think he's going to continue to do so. So, for sure, I think he's a really good streaming option. I think, you could do worse if you were to roster him too.
Thank you for listening to the Fantasy Whisperers podcast. You can hear more from John and Travis on Google Play, SoundCloud, and iTunes. You can also follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at TF Whisperers.